And I'm always reminded of the passage from Blaise Pascal. Maybe you've heard this before. He says, I apologize for the long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. And so I apologize for the big piles, didn't have time to consolidate. I wanted to, before I begin to speak, just so that you don't feel alone, I wanted to share one of my favorite little teachings from a wonderful teacher named Bhante Gunaratna, entitled The Mind. He says, somewhere in the process of meditation, you will come face to face with the sudden realization that you are completely crazy. Your mind is a shrieking madhouse on wheels barreling down that hill, utterly out of control and hopeless. No problem. You are not any crazier than you were yesterday. It has always been this way, and you never noticed. So part of why this is called insight knowledge, insight meditation, is because we have the opportunity of, rather than running from ourselves, going out of ourselves in search, that we come home and we reclaim our heritage. And part of our heritage is, and I use this in a very loose way, and I know that there is serious ways of speaking about this, but part of our heritage is built into our brain functioning, is mental illness. The fundamental mental illness of having this capacity to project and to plan, having it then take over, having the capacity, this amazing capacity to remember, have this amazing capacity to create, but to have this function go so excessively out of control that we lose touch with the richness and immediacy of life. And it's exactly the same today as it was at the time of the Buddha. Is the open secret that you, as you are right here, is what you're looking for. In spite of that, we have convinced ourselves, and our mind is continually convincing ourselves, that next will be better, that the best is tomorrow. And of course, we've realized that there is no such thing as tomorrow, except as an idea today. That there never will be, because, as Alan Watts puts it, time is always now. So there's no salvation in time. There's no point that you reach where you'll be saved, because that point is right now. You've already reached it. It's just a matter of realizing. So I say these things, and it could have been the Buddha saying the same thing 2,600 years ago. Said that our big problem is that we have this very strong tendency that drives us into the imagined future, this tendency to want things to be different than the way they are, which on the surface seems like a very innocent, natural response to things being difficult. But that tendency to lean forward keeps us in a state of tension, keeps us in a state of waiting, of postponing, and reinforces the feeling that this present moment is just a moment that we are passing through on our way to someplace else, instead of the whole ball of wax. As Eckhart Tolle, I'm sure you've all read his books, The Power of Now and this and that, he talked about the present moment as it turns into three things: a pass-through, like I was just saying, on our way to somewhere else, or it becomes the obstacle. Isn't it amazing? The only time we have becomes an obstacle, or it becomes the enemy. The present becomes the enemy. And all of this is our mind's projection on basically 6 experiences that we have. What are those 6 experiences that we have? and the enormity of our dramatization of these 6 experiences makes us feel like life is much more dramatic than it is. Because it really comes down to the repetition of 6 experiences. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching or sensing with the body, and thinking. That's all. One of the Buddha's most famous suttas, or discourses, considered one of the most pithy discourses, was that if we understood that in the seen, there's just what's seen. In the heard, there's just what's heard. In the smell, just what's smelled. In the tasted, just what's tasted. In the felt, just what's felt. In the cognized, just what's cognized. That's all. No me, no you, no self at all. Just what there is. In other words, just this moment, things as they are. It's too simple for us to recognize. It's actually too vast. It's too wonderful, and it's too easy. But slowly, slowly, in the course of our practice, we unwind, we unbind our minds, our hearts and minds, and we first begin to tease out the difference, to slowly tease out the difference between those 6 experiences and the very interesting and very creative embellishments that our mind makes about things. Like you probably have a story about your retreat and how it's going now, don't you? And when it's pleasant, this is going great. I'm doing great. You know, of course, that I'm doing great is a story about somebody who doesn't even exist. It's an imaginary version of you. I'm doing terrible. I'm having a terrible day. But really there is no wonderful day or terrible day. That's a story that we tell about certain reactions that we're having to these 6 experiences. So this tendency to move from the bare, as some of the traditional teachings put it, the bare data of experience. It sounds kind of technical, but bare, the bare bones reality, and that's what we're invited to check out, the bare reality. It's not quite as bad when we're not looking back and not looking ahead, not making a story about things. Not quite as bad as our mind can, or not, maybe even not quite as great initially. But if we can get the bare, start to touch the bare reality, the utter ordinariness of these 6 experiences, you might find, as the Buddha discovered, that in the ordinary, in fact, the ordinary is the most extraordinary, so easily missed. Some people who don't practice meditation or haven't practiced would never understand if I said, one day I was doing walking meditation and I was so intimately involved in the step that I was taking, wide awake, heart open, just stepping and aware of stepping, that the thought came to my mind, if I never did anything else with the rest of my life would be fulfilled. Now that sounds completely crazy, doesn't it? In this world that demands becoming somebody, doing something, getting somewhere, getting rid of something, to find complete satisfaction and completeness in a step. It sounds crazy, but yet it's something that we can taste just and something so easily overlooked in our lives. So see if even as you listen today that you might just touch what's already here, this open secret that there's ultimately no improvement on this moment. I don't know how many of you saw the Jack Nicholson movie many years ago called As Good as It Gets. Remember when he went into the psychiatrist's office and he says to all the people who are sitting there like this, he says, what if this is as good as it gets? But if we lived our lives that way, it might be different. And that's really, in some way, what the invitation of mindfulness is. This is not to say that if you practice living with that understanding, this is as good as it gets, doesn't mean that your life can't become more beautiful, more open-hearted. That's an inevitable possibility if you truly learn to live in the present moment. Is that immediacy is the doorway to unleashing your love, unleashing that sense of connection, of coming out of the tangle of fear, of me, of mine, of our self-preoccupation, and begin to sense that, wow, when I'm right here, really right here, I don't feel much separation from the life around me. I can't find the dividing line between you and me. High and low, hot and cold, all these dualities. There's just life. And it's very full right here. It's very alive. And it's presentness itself. And I'm it. You're it. Easily overlooked. And out of that is, at least the way I like to think of it is, or the way I experience it is, I just want to love everybody up from that point of view, from that realization. Because I know that you don't exist apart from me. It's like, you're me, and I'm you. That doesn't take anything away from the conventional reality where I've got my story, you've got yours, my life, my challenges, my history, all that's unique and very beautiful for each of us, but I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But there is this possibility that in the span of our practice, of our inquiry, we can discover that, I hate to make it sound like a thing, but it's that substratum where we're very much part of the same soup, that we are always in the midst of everything, right where it touches us. And we're busy looking for that sense of connection, that sense of love somewhere else. No different from the time of the Buddha. He knew that there was some little secret he was missing in honoring the title of the retreat, Walking in the Footsteps of the Buddha. Isn't that what it's called? He was just like us, looking for love in all the wrong places, tried sex, tried drugs, tried rock and roll. No, he didn't try rock and roll. Tried all the most wonderful sensual pleasures available. And yet there was something still unquiet in his heart. There was still a queasiness. There was still a sense of something's not quite right. I'm looking for relief, but everything that I seem to go to that I'm taught will bring me happiness and relief, it gives me just a moment of pleasure, but then leaves in its wake a feeling of loss, dissatisfaction, and it tends to condition then the desire for more. And that just, it's a wheel, and he called that wheel samsara. I love the way Hafiz talked about this, the legacy of having the misplaced faith. This is the Buddha's word, misplaced faith in the pleasures of the senses. Hafiz put it this way. He says, learn to recognize the counterfeit coins that may buy you just a moment of pleasure, but then drag you for days like a broken man behind a farting camel. Wonderful. Thank you. But fortunately, something woke him up out of that. His own restlessness woke him up, and he felt that through his body. He felt that through the senses. That sense of, something's not right. And then with his eyes, the door of perception of the eyes, it all comes down to the body. With his eyes, he saw, when they were wide open, he saw, as we inevitably do if our eyes are wide open, he saw sickness. He saw old age. He saw death. These things may be obvious to us, but we don't see them. In fact, we make it a point to hide our elderly away so we don't see them, or our sick away so we don't see them. That's why everybody should make a trip to Varanasi, Benares in India. Watch the way they bring the procession of the corpses in, and they put them on the big in the burning ghats, and they burn them, and you really get it. Death is certain to the one who's born. As Wiley's dictionary put it, the definition of birth, the leading cause of death. But he saw that everything that is born goes through this cycle of aging, sickness, old age, death. And it reminded him, it shook him, it struck him that this nature of change is, and impermanence is the nature of everything, the nature of our things, our people, our situations, our relationships, everything has that nature. And if you don't live in harmony with this fact, you will get, in your clinging to how you want things to be, how you wish they were, you get, as one of my teachers put it, rope burn. You suffer. So when he saw these things, having been immersed in the somehow innocent trance of thinking that if you could clump enough sense pleasures together and have them repeat themselves in close succession, that you could call yourself happy. When he saw through that illusion where something got his attention, specifically the sickness and old age and death, almost instantaneously, at least as the suttas put it, his pride in youth. We tend to have this until we age, of course, but there tends to be a lot of pride in youth and a whole identification with staying young and being young. His pride in youth vanished. At this time he was 29 years old. But his pride in health vanished. He saw that having pride in health is also a losing cause, even though it doesn't mean that you don't try to stay as healthy as you can. But his pride in youth dissolved, his pride in health dissolved, and even his pride in life. This whole identification with staying alive, being alive, even though there's something of that survival built into our DNA, built in, it's instinctual, but yet it affected his mind enough to at least know that the definition of his birth was that it was going to be the leading cause of his demise. And that this wasn't just true for him, it was true for everyone. So then, what do you do about this kind of, what he called samvega, this kind of shock and dismay at the futility of finding something lasting in that world of changing conditions, the unreliability of our lives and the experiences that we have? What do you do? Fortunately, not only did he see what are called the three heavenly messengers, sickness, old age, and death, heavenly messengers because they wake us up, but he saw a fourth one in the form of a renunciate. somebody who was living, going against the stream, living an example of presence and simplicity and renunciation, a sense of inner sufficiency, not so dependent on circumstances for a sense of well-being. And that sounds like a nice idea, but more often than not we get the idea that when we hear the thought of a renunciate, a nun or a monk, that somehow we have to give everything up. And then we shut down and then go back to shopping. But it really just asks us to not, as Suzuki Roshi, not to give up the things of this world. Suzuki Roshi put it, renunciation isn't giving up the things of this world. It's just understanding that they go away. Living with that understanding. But seeing that renunciate reminded him that there may be a way of finding whatever that reliable refuge by turning the attention, not so much out as we normally do. And that beacon head style, always looking, that hungry ghost always looking for the next sweet one. Have you all heard the stories of Mullah Nasruddin, the Sufi wise person, fool? Well, Mullah Nasruddin, just in one of his stories, he saw that he had students around him, and he was a kind of crazy man, and he saw that he went to the market and saw that there was a sale on chili peppers. So he bought a big bushel of chili peppers, and he brought them back to his home, and his students gathered around as he ate the chili peppers one after another. And they saw him perspiring and just burning up, and he keeps eating them one after another. And finally his students said to him, Mullah, what are you doing? Why are you eating these chili peppers? And he looked up through his sweaty eyes and face and body, and he said, I'm looking for a sweet one. And this is precisely what we do. So seeing the renunciate kind of perked up the Buddha's attention, and he realized that there may be a way of finding relief other than just checking out, but perhaps checking in a different way. Perhaps not so much in the future, but more immediately. Because there was a power in the renunciate's countenance, in his presence. There was a calm that radiated, that some kind of secret that we all know when we meet someone who has that, whatever that vibe is, that they're not, that they've called off the search, that they're no longer searching, they've already know that they're at home, no longer going out of themselves in search. So he found out that there were those who taught meditation practice. It's during Vedic times, and there were teachers, and so he found out the best teacher to go sit with. And elements of what he did in his practice were just what you're doing here today. He created the conditions in his mind through gathering his attention to his body, to his breath, again and again and again, and by gently prompting the attention. It's sometimes described as the use of two aspects of everyone's mind. Everybody has a capacity within their mind to gather the attention, called vitaka, and vichara, and then sustain that or sink into whatever's being noticed. Gathering or connecting and sustaining, connecting and sustaining. So I've been inviting you all day long to connect and sustain. Stay with it. Come to that single point. That single point is sometimes called ekagata, the one point that includes everything. And that's where we find that connection with life. Not when we're all splayed out like this, but when we come to that sense of uprightness, that sense of centeredness. All of a sudden I feel a little more connected to you and the room around me. If I spread out like this, I feel really over here and you're over there. Really separate. And I'm daydreaming about myself. What it's going to be like when I get home. And my mind's getting more dull every moment. But when we gather and connect and sustain, we plug into this inexhaustible current we call life, presence. And when he did that with this teacher, creating these conditions, he experienced what's called samadhi, or concentration. A mind that is collected and composed. He experienced a mind temporarily free of wanting to be someplace else. Did you have any moments like that today? And with that, the absence of what are called the torments of the mind, he experienced what sometimes described in the teachings as unmixed happiness. Super mundane, beyond the mundane kind of happiness. Delicious. He said, wow. And as many of you said today, wow. It's just little glimpses. This is cool. This is really nice to, for once in the span of my month or year, not to want to be somewhere else. I remember I had that moment. Maybe I talked about this before. When I graduated college, I had the good fortune of going, I think I was 22 years old, and I went to Central America. My cousin had a little coffee farm, and he had this little tea house on the coffee farm, and had a hammock in it. And one day I went and just take a little nap in the hammock, in this little shack, coffee shack or tea shack in this. And there was a flash, a moment where I realized it was the first moment that I knew of in my whole life. First conscious moment where I didn't want to be somewhere else. And it shocked me, because what followed was a cascade of thoughts of all the places I had been, the things that I'd done, and I wasn't actually there. I was busy with what's next. So that kind of one-pointedness, that kind of collectedness, that kind of here-ness and now-ness can come in any conditions. But in this case, it came not only in the conditions of meditation, but because it came in the conditions of meditation, it had a great power to it. The mind becomes laser-like in its strength and power. It becomes very discerning, it opens up that our mind door, our psychic door, our intuition, when we're really collected. You don't have to believe in any of this stuff, but it is very much written in the teachings that when you have very strong concentration, and it ebbs and flows, but when you have strong concentration, if you really develop that, it comes with all kinds of powers. But that's not what this is about. That's just tends to create more ego, more isolation in a way. But he saw very quickly, even though he experienced this great joy of concentration, this unmixed happiness, he saw that it was just, as one of my teachers put it, high-class samsara. It was just a higher class of suffering. It was still subsumed under the umbrella of what he called dukkha. Dukkha meaning, in this case, unreliable, unsatisfactory, because eventually those sublime states of mind will pass away. So if we make that the aim of our practice, it's just feeding the clinging, craving mind, feeding the mind of dissatisfaction. At the same time, however, he later talked about how valuable it is to train our mind to be able to be here, to be able to be steady, to be able to be strong, to be able to apply that mental strength, that observing power, to be able to see more clearly what's going on. And through insight, through understanding, the view is that it is wisdom that unleashes our love. It's wisdom that dispels illusion and ends our suffering, not special states of meditation. Do you see the difference? I don't know. I don't know how to say it. I don't remember what I said. My mind was drifting at that point too. That it's the idea that wisdom is what liberates the heart, not special states of mind. States of mind are by their nature, as all states of mind, as all experiences, they are changeable, unreliable, unsatisfactory, in that they can't give you lasting happiness. But the wisdom, the understanding of that law of impermanence is what frees us, brings us a sense of serenity with things the way they are. So unfortunately for the prince, Siddhartha, who was still like you and me, just trying to figure it out, still a seeker. Unfortunately, there was no one around to help him out, to figure it out anymore. He thought maybe these meditation teachers, but he thought they were just teaching high-class samsara, just a more refined kind of dukkha. And this is these are the steps that he followed. And all of us have tried special experiences in our life, haven't we? We've gotten nauseated from special experiences and searching for them. Fortunately, he was so keen on finding something reliable, something truly free, finding a happiness that wasn't subject to the winds of circumstances, that he kept going. But he still had to make a few detours. Somebody here tell me what he did next. What's that?
He left his kingdom?
No, he'd already done that when he started doing the samadhi practice, the concentration practice. He tried ascetic practices. He tried to deny himself pleasure, to deny himself the sustenance, the joy of the senses. It seems like a logical progression, doesn't it? But it was completely insane, given that these sense doors have a reason. 5 of our 6 senses are very sensual. There's a reason. We weren't just built to say that we have to shut these down. At least that's not my sense. So shutting them down or indulging in them are two extremes. One's grasping and the other one's aversion. Grasping and aversion, what's it like when you push away and you hold on? Is that free? Is that open? No. So in the realization that his ascetic practices just made him sick, tired, and aversive, cranky, dull, he knew that if he was going to find a reliable refuge, it had to be beyond both. It had to be something that had a measure of of comfort and pleasure in it, but not indulgence, and a measure of renunciation and simplicity, but not denial, not aversion. Something that transcended both extremes of indulgence and asceticism. And no one really to guide him, but he did realize just intuitively, and that reminds us that we all have within us intelligence and wisdom. If we just keep applying our attention, we all have the answers. All of our worrying and ruminating, more often than not, blocks our intuition, blocks our natural intelligence that knows how to respond and speak and be in situations. Make decisions even. Even decisions are made through, not usually so well, through that cerebral process of rumination. That we can learn to trust more the intrinsic intelligence in our minds. So finally, anyway, he sat down under the Bodhi tree and decided not to get up. He'd given up searching anywhere else, the different extremes, different teachers, nobody there to teach him. He sat down and he brought in the sensual world again. He took food, remembered a time when he was young and comfortable, and he saw that you do have to have some measure, you have to have gladness in your heart. You can't do this by denial. You have to be well fed, you have to be as healthy as possible, you have to have your senses wide open, being able to take in the sustenance of the senses, but not get caught in clinging to them. So he took food. He saw that you need to have a strength of mind, and his mind had gotten weak. So he took food, and then he brought his mental strength up, his observing power back up to speed, so to speak. And he came back to exactly the same thing that we're doing here in the initial phases of our practice. He connected and sustained. He gathered, created the conditions for tranquility, for calm abiding, for focus, for concentration. And he, again, experienced the joy of concentration. So he's already seeing that the joy of having sense experiences is useful. It gladdens our heart, keeps us open, not too much. And in fact, he said later that the joy of sense pleasures is more likely to have if you live in a way that's non-harming. If you really take care with your speech, your actions, be sensitive to your environment, etc., and you live what he called you experience the bliss of blamelessness, where you're not constantly reverberating from having clouded your mind or hurt somebody or yourself with your inner or outer speech, then your life becomes a kind of ornament that you tend to just attract good relationships. You tend to, because your mind isn't so inundated with the effects of your past actions, you're able to have your senses open and enjoy life. So a real condition for being able to enjoy the happiness of sense pleasures is to be a good person. And that's really a central part of our training, is to train in, like I said last night, in being respectful of life, not taking that which is not offered, not causing harm with our sexuality, harm with our speech, harm with intoxicants. That if you practice in that way, bring the same care and mindfulness to those things, you start being able to actually enjoy your lives. So there was joy in being able to enjoy the sense pleasures, not indulge. And then he saw that there's joy in being able to have concentration, concentrated heart. But in this case, he didn't stop with the joy of sense pleasures and the joy of concentration. And it's said in the sutras, in the discourses, that he didn't let the joy that arose in his mind overtake him. Instead, he felt it, but instead he applied the power of mind, the strength of his mind, strength of attention, strength of heart and courage. He applied it toward the careful examination, the moment-to-moment awareness of things just the way they are. And so he opened his attention, as we began to do this afternoon, opened his attention to the whole field of sensations. The entire field of mind with its moods, its emotions, thoughts and images. And a strange thing happened, at least he may not have expected this when he started paying attention to the flow of experience. But you'll know this by the end of the retreat. Remember last night I said that by the end of the retreat, your eyes that were maybe dull when you got here will be brightened. That's not an accident. It's not just from a little healing. It's from having your attention lit up by whatever you're paying attention to. And he noticed that no matter what he paid attention to, instead of his mind, because he had mental strength, instead of it getting lost in it, it just kept, everything he noticed just kept brightening his mind. Until, as he described it, his mind, his attention was shining in its clarity. He actually sensed that his mind, the nature of his mind was luminous. Have you ever felt that, where your mind was lit, like light, luminous? It may just sound like an idea right now, but just consider that the nature of your mind is light, is love. The expression of it is love. As one of my favorite teachers, Nisargadatta Maharaj, put it, when your mind is kept away from its preoccupations, it becomes quiet. And if you don't disturb that quiet and you stay in it, you'll discover that it's permeated with a light and a love you've never known, yet you recognize it at once as your own nature. Once you've tasted that, you'll never be the same person again. The unruly mind will break that peace and obliterate that vision, as you've noticed, but it's bound to return if the effort is sustained, and that's what we're doing here, until all bonds are broken, grasping and attachment ends, and life becomes supremely concentrated in the here and now, in the present. But don't be fooled by the sense of concentration. It's very important, but it's most important when it's applied toward insight knowledge. So the more he paid attention to things, the brighter his mind became. So we're in there we're following in the footsteps of the Buddha here. We're sitting under the Bodhi tree. You are all sitting under your own Bodhi tree. And then he started not just to notice that his mind got brighter, but the brighter his mind got, the more clear everything he noticed became. His mind became so mirror-like that everything was reflected more clearly. So he could actually see those sensations that were floating through his body. Did you notice the sensations became a little bit more alive in your mind today? Did you notice that you were able to feel moods more intimately? Feel the restlessness or feel the dullness. You could see it like a cloud. Perhaps some of you may have been steady enough today to actually notice how thoughts float through the mind like clouds. Often they're too slippery for us to notice. We don't even notice them till after they're gone because we've been kind of carried away. Sometimes you just see these little thought bubbles. But in his case, his mind became very clear. And in that clarity, he began to see the commonality, once and for all, not just all outer experience, as he realized what got him going to begin with. He says, okay, all outer experience is changeable. All outer experience is unreliable. Then he started to see the same thing about inner experience. The sensations were all coming and going. The moods coming and going. The thoughts and images coming and going. And he saw that they were marked by three things: impermanence and change, unreliability, which is, of course, anything that's impermanent can't be reliable, can't give you lasting satisfaction. And he saw that, and this is a little bit more subtle and harder for us to understand in most cases, he saw that all experience was also marked by selflessness. It was just happening all by itself. The thoughts were coming unbidden, the sensations were arising, the moods were arising, and in that process of continual changing conditions, couldn't find any one to whom it was happening to. It was all just happening of itself. And so consequently, he saw that there was not one experience that could be said to be me and mine, could be self-defining, but all revealing themselves as empty of any substantiality, empty of self. Now, the experience of this is different than reflecting on it and thinking about it. The experience of it was liberating. Because the more he saw, the more that what reflected in the mirror of mind was this changing show, this display of changing conditions. Any tendency to want to hold on to it and make it into myself just started to loosen. Make it into me and mine and self-defining. All that started to loosen. And lo and behold, as his mind stopped, as he stopped grabbing, pushing away the things that came into his heart and mind, he got happier and happier. He was beginning to glimpse a well-being that didn't depend on what was going through his life and his mind. He was beginning to glimpse what he called lokuttara sukha, unconditional happiness. A happiness that is free of hunger, free of thirst, as opposed to what he called the other kinds of refined and not so refined happiness. He called lokiya sukha, which is worldly happiness, otherwise described as the happiness of bondage, happiness of slavery, because we get caught in a loop. So he experienced a joy, not the joy of ordinary pleasures, not the joy of concentration, but the joy of equanimity, of balance, of that mountain-like presence that can withstand all the storms, all the winds of praise and blame and gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and shame. Be able to experience everything, but maintain spaciousness and balance. And as he experienced that joy, his mind relaxed. And in that relaxation, are you still with me? And in that relaxation, in a flash of insight, I mentioned this last night, in a flash of insight, his mind, and I'm using language, and I shouldn't discount this because I don't know exactly what happened, but I think it has something to do with in that time his mind opened, and in a flash of insight he realized that the reliable refuge that he had been searching for was none other than the innermost nature of his own heart and mind. And that's when he called off the search, so to speak. And yet, having seen what could sometimes be described as having seen his own true face, his own true nature, he thought it was so subtle that he didn't think anybody could get it initially. But then with his awakened eye of wisdom, with his intelligence, and with a little help from his friends, he saw that there were those like us, those rare beings who are interested and interested enough to search, and those who are searching enough to actually put their tush on the cush. That there were those with just a little dust on their eyes, that it pointed in the direction of their own nature, cultivating cultivating the capacities within our heart to awaken mindfulness, concentration, letting joy get awakened, letting love flow, realizing day after day that we don't exist apart from each other, that those with that in mind and with good intentions could realize the same freedom that he did, because it is the inherent nature of everyone. And so he started to teach. And I'll tell you the rest tomorrow. But just a little sneak preview. First went to his most sincere friends with just a little dust, his ascetic friends. You had to be sincere to starve yourself and to deny, but still ignorant. But he went to his ascetic friends. And in that first conversation, he shared in a sutta called just loosely, the Dhammacakka Sutta, the turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the beginning of the dissemination of what he realized. In that, he shared the teaching that is really embedded in every other teaching and every other practice that's done in the Buddhist tradition, which is the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. And I really like to tell his story, at least the way I tell it. I like to tell it because you can see how what his own life realization, his own path, how that informed what he then later taught. So that it's not just a teaching that he dropped out of some kind of mystical plane of existence. It came out of his body, came out of his direct experience. In fact, he even said, as one of the renditions of the Four Noble Truths, in this fathom-long body, with its senses and inner sense, lies the world. Lies the cause of the world, lies the end of the world, lies the path leading to the end of the world. All comes back to this body. And through his body, he discovered the Four Noble Truths. And I'll talk more about them tomorrow. And we'll talk about tomorrow will be called the Body of Awakening. And because and what we're doing here, it's all about mindfulness directed to the body and what we can realize. So thanks for listening. Let's just sit quietly. For one moment, so I'll share, just to end the talk and this time, a poem or passage from Edgar Allan Poe that highlights the fact of impermanence and how much it informed the awakening of the Buddha. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of golden sand, how few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep while I weep, while I weep. O God, can I not grasp them in a tighter clasp? O God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? May all beings find their composure with change. May all beings find the joy of equanimity. May all beings be liberated.